A lot of people have asked why I didn't just take Joe's tigers instead of a money judgment, and variations on those kinds of questions. Why did I continue to sue him? Why did we spend money suing him? And so I'm going to try and answer all of those questions within this one video. In 2011, Joe had a routine where he would pack up a semi truck and he would drive it to malls all across the United States. He'd usually get there on a Wednesday. He'd set up, charge people to pet the cubs Wednesday through Sunday, and then he'd pack them all back up and then drive to the next mall. And they would sometimes come back to his zoo in Wynnewood to pick up new cubs and offload the older cubs that were no longer usable. We had been contacting malls and explaining to them that this is cruel and why it was cruel. And you can see that in some of the other videos that we've talked about. But what happened was the malls started canceling his shows. And so he got mad and decided he was going to name his traveling show Big Cat Rescue Entertainment. And he used, which was, our name is copyright protected, he used a portion of our logo, he used part of the website. He, even though he's in Oklahoma, he got a area code for the place where we live, which is Tampa, Florida, to confuse people and make them think that he was Big Cat Rescue. So we couldn't let him ruin our name. We had to do something about that. Meanwhile, he was showing the photo that you guys may have seen of the ladies with the rabbits, and he was telling people that we had crushed these rabbits in the head and that they were so happy the rabbits were dead, and all of that was just a lie. And I hadn't planned on getting into that, but what that was back then, this was probably circa 2009 maybe, we couldn't afford the kind of food that we feed today. And so the very best diet for big cats is a whole animal, and they love whole rabbits. And so the people who breed rabbits for the snake industry, for people that have pet snakes, that's where we get them from. They arrive frozen. And the reason that the people were smiling is because that was such a huge treat for them to be able to give that to their favorite cats. And it was when we couldn't afford to do that otherwise. So that's why they were all smiling. But anyway, like Joe always did, he misrepresented everything about us. And so he was trying to get people upset and succeeded in doing that. And so the photos were copyright protected, and we sued him on that as well. And it's, well, I'll get into how his mother got involved in that in a separate video. But at any rate, we pursued him through regular legal channels, and that's the only thing we can do. We don't have the ability to go in and say, you have to stop cub petting. We don't have the ability to go in and say, stop using our name and give us all your cats. We just can't do that. And so we went through the regular legal process. We got a judgment for, I think, like $1.2 million against him pretty quickly. It took a couple of years because stuff like that takes a couple of years. But we got the judgment. And I think Joe thought that if he consented to the judgment, which he did, it wasn't ordered by the court. Joe agreed to that amount, but I think he thought that he could just go right down to the bankruptcy court and get out from under having to pay it, because he had already gotten away with that once. He talks about his brother Carole, and they had a pet store in Texas. And apparently, from the records that I've read online and people that know him, what I've been told is that he decided that they owed too much money on the pet store, so they bankrupted the business, took all of the stuff right down the street and opened up a new pet store with all of their stuff they didn't have to pay for now because of the bankruptcy court. So I think he thought he was going to be able to do the same thing by filing bankruptcy against our judgment. And we couldn't let him get away with that. And so we've continued to press him for collection. The bankruptcy court threw out his personal bankruptcy because it was, well, you can look that up yourself, but it's my understanding that it was so full of lies that that's why they threw it out. And the bankruptcy against his zoo, the GW Zoo, has taken this long because every time we get to the point where the judge orders him to pay, then what he does, or we get close to that point, then he changes the name of the zoo and moves all of his assets amazingly and magically over into the new zoo. And so we've had to go through that like 3 or 4 times now. And so at what point do we stop pursuing him on that? And you know, when you look back over the course of 2011 to 2020, that's a lot of years and a lot of money, but there was no point at which we could just stop and say, okay, you win, you get to keep breeding and exploiting animals and taking advantage of people and using our name and using our photos. We can't do that. So there's, at one point, and I forget when this was, I'm thinking it was like 2017, Joe and my husband met with a mediator in the bankruptcy court, in the bankruptcy proceedings, and they came to an agreement. And the agreement was that Joe would stop breeding the cubs for pimping out for pay to play, and he'd start making modest payments. And you know, we took into account, he was saying, you know, he makes a lot of money in the summer but not a lot in the winter, so we could make the payments smaller in the winter to be able to accommodate him. And it was never about the money. It was, you know, the best thing that could ever happen, in our opinion, was for him to stop the cub petting. And so we were thrilled that he was willing to do that. And they came to an agreement and they wrote up the agreement. And this took a while, so it was a few days later, and the agreement was sent out to him for his signature, and he refused to sign it. And so all of the parties got back on the phone again, and I wasn't talking on the phone, even though Jeff likes to say that I did, or Joe likes to say that I threw a monkey wrench on this. I wasn't speaking at all. But anyway, while they were all on the phone asking, why aren't you guys signing this agreement that we all agreed to, then Jeff Lowe gets on the phone and says they're not going to sign the agreement. And apparently he told Joe he would finance him to fight us as long as he wanted to fight us, as long as he didn't give up the cats. They have never wanted to give up the cats. And I can't know whether or not Joe would have kept his promise if we had been able to settle, but the very fact that they've never been able or never been willing to give up their breeders tells me that they don't have any intention of stopping the breeding for the cub petting. So there's no reason to take his cats that don't breed anymore, because that just makes it easier on him to keep breeding more cats, because it gives him more cages that he can fill up. And I know he has sent off several of his cats to Pat Craig's place, the wild animal sanctuary, and I feel bad about that, because Joe went online laughing and giggling about how he had really pulled the wool over PETA's eyes by giving them the cats that he couldn't breed anymore. So there's no way to take the animals from these abusive people unless you are able to stop them from continuing to just go out and get more cats. And they're always going to want to get rid of their adults. They only want the money makers. And anybody who enables that activity isn't helping with the problem at all. The only way to stop the cub handling and all of the breeding that goes into creating cubs to be used for that pay-to-play scheme is our federal bill. And our federal bill would ban the public contact with the big cats, and it would phase out the private ownership of the cats. And so over time, those cats who are currently in cages would die out, and this whole problem would be done, and we could focus on saving cats in the wild. And then that leads to the last question, which is, okay, well, what happens if that bill passes? What about all of these places? There's probably about 8 people, like the people that you saw, Joe Exotic and Doc Antle. I hate calling him Doc or Bhagavan. His name's Kevin. But at any rate, him and Tim Stark and Bill Meadows and Mario Tabro and Dade City Wild Things, Kathy Stearns. I think she's finally been closed down now, but there's no way to stop them from just going out and getting more cats and breeding more cats unless the federal bill passes. And so that's why we need everybody to contact their member of Congress and ask them to champion the Big Cat Public Safety Act. It's never gotten as far as it's gotten this time around. It's got 227 co-sponsors in the House, which is a majority, which means if it just goes to the floor, it will pass. We've never had Republicans sign on to the Senate version of the bill before, but now they have. And so I think it has a path to passing and becoming law. And the only way that's going to happen is if you contact your member of Congress and ask them to champion the Big Cat Public Safety Act. Once that happens, and those people who are exploiting cats can't exploit cats any longer, probably a bunch of them will give up their cats. But there are a lot of really good sanctuaries that don't buy or breed or sell or allow public contact or take the cats off site for exhibition. And those are accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. You can find out everybody who's accredited in the animal sanctuary world at sanctuaryfederation.org. So there are plenty of places out there that would take all of those cats gladly, all of those animals. These people often have primates and all kinds of animals, but you don't have to worry that they're not going to have a place to go. They will have the best care possible for the rest of their natural lives if we can just stop the problem at its root.